I could be covering every single big story as it comes out, giving hot takes and churning out the content Tim Pool style, but I prefer to slack off and respond late under the guise of journalistic responsibility and waiting for the whole story, you know? What I'm really looking for, though, is for what I cover to reflect some broader idea for viewers to consider once this story inevitably fades out of the blindingly fast news cycle. So let's talk about the firing of Gina Carano from The Mandalorian, the resulting conservative backlash, Carano's new deal with Ben Shapiro's Daily Wire, and what it all means for the media and politics going forward. First, some context. Gina Carano played Cara Dune on the Disney Plus show The Mandalorian, and I have to say she does a pretty good job. She occupies a strong but silent type role, usually reserved for male characters, and unlike the usual attempts by Hollywood to portray skinny women easily beating up men twice their size, Carano is an actual mixed martial artist who looks like she can take a punch. Speaking purely in terms of acting ability, she's good for the show. But here comes the controversy. Carano, like many a celebrity in our day, is under fire for her social media posts. She spread anti-masker disinformation, urging America to open up even amongst the COVID-19 pandemic. She coded her belief in the hashtag #StopTheSteal conspiracy theory with that
"We should really investigate this thing despite there being no evidence of voter fraud"
line Republican politicians are using these days. And she displayed the words boop bop beep in her Twitter profile instead of pronouns, which is actually pretty hilarious. Like, we all recognize that cis people displaying their pronouns is just a pointless virtue signal, right? But the primary reason she got fired was this Instagram repost comparing the current media purge of right-wing extremists to the Holocaust. Responding to fan outcry, Disney and Carano's United Talent Agency both dropped her for anti-Semitism. But let's take a closer look at what the post itself is saying. The basic premise here is that
the Holocaust didn't just suddenly happen. It began with a government-run propaganda campaign convincing common people to hate Jews. Only then would it become okay for the state to round up dissidents and slaughter them by the millions.
But this view is extremely reductive, disanalogous, and ahistorical. The only point of similarity between anti-conservatism today, where it even meaningfully exists, and the rise of the Nazis is a feeling of general hatred. But hatred is everywhere. A lot of people hate a lot of people for a lot of reasons. Even before their rise to power, the Nazis relied on conspiracy theories to characterize Jews as inherently inferior enemies of the people aiming to take control of the world. We, on the other hand, just see Trumpkins as some uneducated mob, which also happens to believe in an elite cabal subverting the people by introducing foreigners to destroy the nation and hijack the state. So not only is Trumpism itself closer ideologically to the Nazis than the Jews they persecuted, to compare contempt for an inferior ethnic group to opposition of dangerous ideologies is a giant leap, as is the idea that anybody today comes close to advocating the systematic murder of conservatives. Continuing down that line, not all Germans hated Jews. Even after Hitler was named chancellor, the Nazis only controlled a little over a third of parliament. Systematic propagandizing and the people's assent was only part of the equation. It was the Reichstag fire, purportedly started by a communist, which allowed the Nazis to accuse the opposition of planning an uprising, which justified their authoritarian seizure of government. Basically like labeling the Capitol rioters secret Antifa infiltrators, except it actually worked. In summary, the entire post is just a bunch of conservatives bitching about persecution like always. Now, the woke argument here is that
comparing such dissimilar events trivializes history so much it's on the order of Holocaust denial. Therefore anti-Semitism, therefore cancellation.
But hold your horses, there's one tiny problem with this sort of logic. Hasn't everyone made a Hitler comparison at some point in their time online? A lot of conservatives are pointing out that Pedro Pascal, who plays the Mandalorian himself, also tweeted a comparison with Nazi Germany, this time of not cages of not Mexicans at the not border. Donald Trump Jr. responded,
"Does Disney discriminate against women for doing what their male actors do?"
Now, first of all, it's funny how the same conservatives who decry identity politics all the time start gender baiting the moment that becomes convenient for them. Second, children being locked at the border has a racial and dehumanizing element far more comparable than anti-conservatism. But I hate to agree with the right here in that at the core it's all still just a rhetorical strategy rather than some intellectual statement. Not saying Gina Carano isn't a fascist, of course, since regardless of your personal convictions, supporting Donald Trump effectively means you're supporting racism. But the post itself essentially boils down to
Democrats bad, Democrats equals Nazis, Nazis bad.
Like, I get this post is highly irresponsible, but there's no way this is actually anti-Semitic. I'm not convinced anything she posted is far enough to the extreme that Disney needed to take action and fire her. In fact, I can't think of a single way firing Carano actually helps anybody but the conservatives we're trying to combat. Gina Carano's not a fucking role model, she's an artist. Even if her social media was that bad, people don't like crazy shits like Richard Wagner, T.S. Eliot, Marilyn Manson, or hell, even Charles Manson for being good people. We appreciate their work because it's creative, strange, or even demented with unique qualities which reframe our perspective. So while we might end up effectively giving platform to someone who will advocate batshit crazy ideas, Disney's job is to preserve artistic integrity. Unless opposing political beliefs makes it hard to work together on set, or there's some disagreement between the artist's message and the organizational ethos or some other bullshit like that, an actor's political opinions should have nothing to do with the running of the show. Actors are workers, and as far as I'm concerned, firing someone for non-work reasons violates their labor rights.
But you always say that principles are worthless without practicality. Isn't it a good thing to reduce the influence of conservatives in media?
Well, that idea hasn't been lost on me. I don't feel the least bit bad when a conservative gets deplatformed. And I expanded on my thoughts about free speech and censorship on social media in a separate video, linked in the top right corner. It's true that we unfortunately live in a capitalist society where the profit motive is priority number one, and doing what we can to limit right-wing disinformation is still in our ultimate interests. But I'm not sure canceling Gina Carano accomplishes either of these goals. On Disney's part, firing Carano is just bad business. Conservatives are already angry at Hollywood for featuring too many gay and black people, and The Mandalorian is basically the only place most Star Wars fans swarm around these days now that the Clone Wars is over and no Star Wars films have been released in the last 4 years. It's basically the only reason anybody gives a shit about Disney Plus at all. I'm sure Disney will weather the storm just fine, but honestly, I don't know whether I'm hoping the mouse loses enough profit to change course, because things don't look good for the leftist position either. Every time some conservative gets canceled, it just feeds more into the narrative of the
woke Hollywood elitist liberals increasingly shoving leftist viewpoints down the throats of common folks who've always just wanted to see an entertaining, apolitical movie.
This view is of course utter horseshit when you consider that movies have always been political to the point of being nationalist propaganda back in the good old days of 2002 after 9/11 and shit. If anything, there's more artistic freedom today than ever before. But conservatives won't let those facts get in the way of their feelings, preferring a sanitized version of filmmaking with no room for potentially challenging or offensive ideas. Wait, that sounds like some other people we know. Anyway, I'm not saying it's never effective to cancel big-name celebrities who make intolerant remarks, because it can hold powerful individuals to account while sending a strong moral message. But firing Gina Carano doesn't meet those requirements. She's not a big enough name, hasn't been quite egregious enough, and frankly, the news of her firing will make a bigger splash than the dive is worth. You know how the grift goes by now. After every cancellation, Fox News and a host of other conservative networks give the victims a call and ask them to come on and complain about cancel culture and how they left the left or whatever. They basically set up a world tour for their new figurehead martyr, eventually landing them in an analyst position or book deal or something. So whenever we cancel someone, we'd better have a damn good reason, because publicly shaming some individual usually isn't worth the loss in credibility the entire left suffers whenever we get associated with Disney's profit preservation schemes. We're already seeing the Gina take her victory lap, but this time with a little twist. See, conservatives have decided that in order to combat the over-politicization of Hollywood, they're gonna create a new right-wing film alternative. Less than 24 hours after her firing, Carano signed a deal with Ben Shapiro's Daily Wire to develop and produce her very own film. The right now thinks it's built up enough hatred toward Hollywood to begin marketing its own movies, beginning with Run, Hide, Fight, which was released last month, and for which I created an Everything Wrong With type video, linked in the top right corner. Look, if they're gonna show, I'm gonna do it too, alright? And, well, as you can see, the good news is all of the Daily Wire's movies are gonna be shit. Conservatives like to tout the go woke, go broke meme as evidence of some sort of liberal degeneracy, but the reason feminist movies, Christian movies, and soon conservative movies all suck is for the same reason. It's not just because conservatives are inherently evil or because conservatism intrinsically lacks creativity. It's that pop culture driven purely by ideology is almost always artistically compromised. Think about it. When a film is billed as by the Daily Wire, they're all just preaching to their own choir. Everybody knows going in what themes to expect, and it's especially hard for an ideologue to craft a dialectic that both fairly represents an opposing idea and why others believe it, and skillfully reaffirms the filmmaker's position without lending credence or humanization to the opposing side, all in the context of a pop culture flick designed for wide audiences in the hope of effective radicalization. It's an almost impossible task, which usually leads instead to a boring, thoughtless hit piece that leaves any film critics or remotely critical viewers thoroughly unimpressed. Even if Ben Shapiro is content with merely scamming his own political base of their money, they'll eventually realize, like users on Parler and Gab did rather quickly, that there really isn't anything to do but wallow in the echo chamber, unstimulated by new ideas.
Heh, that all sounds like Hollywood right now. It will be shit anyway, might as well make a conservative version, right?
Yeah, well, there's the bad news. The ascendance of even a bad Hollywood alternative is likely to self-realize both groups into camps of polarized garbage. Not only will that ultimately be terrible for art itself, it also leaves very little space for actual leftists who don't tend to have access to capital to produce blockbuster films. The rise of the alternative film trend is dangerous at best, and if this ends up being an actual thing, we'll wish we'd opposed cancel culture more strongly from the beginning. Man, this took a long time. I'm actually posting in the middle of the week now, I guess. Time's getting super tight now, and I don't even know if I'll be able to keep up with this loose once-in-a-week type schedule that I have going on right now with this channel. Right now, it seems like I'm occupying the archetype of the quasi-intellectual, anti-woke leftist sort of thing. When I eventually scrounge up enough time to do it, I'll probably make some video summarizing my entire ideological way of thinking, because I do have a lot of things to say that I don't see anybody else making right now. If you like the music, you can go to the link in the description below to download it. It's completely free and completely original. Goodbye.
I'm and I approve this message.